a fantastic film. But I don't know, like, for me, Back to the Future 2 never did it for me the way that it did for you. So I think that it was my sister's favorite as well, because, you know, my sister and I watched a lot of movies together, and we would rent these quite frequently. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure, as much as we laughed as the What'd You Do Jump Ship in the first movie, I think this was our favorite, you know?
Yeah.
So, awesome, right on. Well, I don't know, I think we've covered this here. Are you ready to jump into our questions?
I am, Brandon. So I have a question for you. How many great Scots are said in Back to the Future Part 3?
You know, I lost count. I was trying to count, and then I'm just like, I'm too into the movie and there's too many, so I'm going to guess 7. And I know that Marty said it once.
All right. Yes, and I love that, how they switch they switch statements.
Heavy,
Marty says, great Scott, and Doc's like, I know this is heavy. It's just so funny. It's good that they did that once in the trilogy. But let's count them down. So, 1955 Doc says it on 3 occasions. 1985 Doc says it on 2 occasions. And Marty says it once. So that makes a total of 6.
I was close.
And Back to the Future Part 3, which gives us a grand total of Great Scott being said 16 times in the Back to the Future trilogy. All by Doc Brown except for once. So,
Great Scott, that's a lot of Great Scots.
Now, Brandon, next question. Out of 5 gigawatts, how many gigawatts would you give Back to the Future Part 3?
Well, I definitely am still giving this 5 out of 5. I love this movie. It's a lot of fun. It builds upon the previous one. As I said, while it's not as perfect a script, it's because it's not as complex. It's definitely a 5-star film for me. And my one little tiny pet peeve of Doc Brown building another time machine does not detract from my enjoyment of this film in any way, shape, or form. How about you, Zach?
You know, I'm going to give this 5 out of 5 gigawatts as well. I went back and forth. I'm like, I'm going to give it a 4.5, and I thought, why? Like, why would I not give this a 5, right? Because, you know what? Ultimately, what pushes over the edge to a 5 for me is that it ends the trilogy and the story very well. Very satisfying.
Well,
You know how hard that is? You know how hard it is to satisfyingly end successful movies? You know all the superhero movies where the third movie just tanks the whole thing? Right, or they try to end a story and they botch it, right? And even other franchises were more than 3 movies. So I just think they tied everything up so well, and this really is my favorite trilogy of all time. So I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 gigawatts as well.
Nice, I love it. I look forward to your interpretation on the new Planet of the Apes trilogy, because I think that's a really perfect trilogy as well.
We shall see. Mm-hmm. Sooner than you think, listeners.
Yeah.
The future.
Zach, is this franchise fatigued?
You know, that's a tough question, right? Because when we have these perfect movies, we're like, well, shouldn't we just leave it alone? And so,
no, you have to keep making them until you burn the property to the ground. Then you know you've done enough, and then make one more.
You know, I don't know how to answer that, Brandon. Because part of the strength of the trilogy is it's only 3, and it says the end. Mm-hmm. So if they ever made a 4th one, it'd be like, well, first of all, you just undid the end, which clearly was supposed to be the end, and now you're just diluting it. So I don't know. I guess I would, but it's so great. I don't know what to say.
It's a tough one.
This is a tough. I'm gonna have to say yes, because they told the story they were going to tell, right? Mm-hmm. And anything outside of this extra material, I think it's great to have things like the comics and the rides, right, and the cartoons, and that's great. But as far as like proper movie entries in a franchise, it is fatigue because the story has been told. I think you've exhausted all areas of Hill Valley time periods with Marty McFly and his family, and even went over to Doc Brown, right? Both of the main characters, their stories have been told, and everything else is best left to the imagination or expanded universe material. So I will say yes.
Well, then let me ask you this question based on that answer, because the first one never intended to have sequels. They only made a sequel because it was so successful, right? And at that time, you're like, no, this is not fatigued.
Mm-hmm. Brandon. Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I did say in the first one, I think the only way I would have accepted a 4th one was if it was in 2015, to kind of tie into what they had already done with 2015. So I don't know, man. Like it'd have to be so perfect. And how do you capture lightning in a lightning never strikes twice. to quote
Unless you go back in time.
Huey Lewis in the News, Back in Time song. So, I mean, they capture lightning in a bottle 3 times here, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just impossible to do again, right? You can't do it again. Mm-hmm. And so I'm gonna have to say, don't push your luck, right? Because like you said, you're right. The first one was supposed to be 1. But you know what? For not having 2 or 3 even thought of or planned out, did a hell of a job, right? So just walk away. You got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. You got to know when to walk away, and you got to know when to run. So yes, the franchise is fatigued. It's done.
Okay, so I'm gonna say no, and I'll use another franchise to justify it. Okay, Friday the 13th, Part 4, the final chapter, was so successful and we got something really creative with 5 and 6 in Friday the 13th. So, I mean, if we got, while they're not as good movies as Back to the Future, I mean, like, they intended Friday the 13th Part 4 to be the last.
The final chapter.
Right, they called it the final chapter. And we got 2 really creative movies after that. So, I am definitely saying no. We should have got a 4. They could have creatively come up with something, I think. Well, with this talent, with this team, they could have come up with something.
If this was 2000 and not 2020, then maybe, right? Because it's like, okay, it was 10 years ago, right? Maybe not, right? But we've gone too far.
They can't make one now, but yeah, exactly. Well, that's the question: is this if this is we just walked out of the movie theaters after Back to the Future 3? Would we want to see another one?
Okay,
I would say yes.
All right, well, yes. Okay, if you told me there was a Back to the Future 4, I would go see it at midnight, right? So maybe I will say no. It's not fatigue. All right, you broke me, Brandon. You broke me.
Good.
You have broken my. They need to leave art alone and artistic integrity. Yes, I would absolutely love a Back to the Future 4. I would see the hell out of it.
Yes.
So, yeah, fine. It's not fatigue. Good. You won. Congratulations.
Excellent. Right on.
So, anyway. But, hey, Brandon, this is our 50th episode. It's a milestone.
It is our 50th episode, and you guys may have noticed that it came out early. We released this early by like a week and a half, right? Because today is the 30th anniversary of Back to the Future Part 3. So what a great way to celebrate the 30th anniversary of one of our favorite franchises of all time than by talking about it. And it's going to be a little bit like it'll be our normal wait until you get the recap episode, but we wanted to give you guys this one on the anniversary because why the heck not?
Because anniversaries and time travels and 30-year gaps are very important in this franchise. So when else would it be more appropriate to do something like this? So.
Never. That's when. Awesome. Zach, thank you so much for discussing this with me. Where can people find you when you're not saving the love of your life from falling off a cliff because her horses were spooked by snakes?
Well, Brandon, you can find me personally on Twitter at MoronZach. That's MOOREONZACH. I'm also the host of my own podcast, Always Hold On to Smallville. We talk about each and every episode of that Young Superman show. You can find us on Twitter at AlwaysSmallville with 1 S. And Brandon, when you aren't throwing Frisbee pies at people to keep them from shooting your best friend, where can people find you?
Well, you can, before that, find me eating the pie that was in that Frisbee pie holder.
Far out.
And hopefully it was pumpkin. Pumpkin pie is my favorite. But after that, you can find me on Twitter at Brandon Matella. You can find me over on the Fandom Podcast Network with my friends Chris and Tom. We have a show called Good Evening, an Alfred Hitchcock podcast. You can find me on the Trek FM Network with a show called The Line, which is all about Star Trek Picard. And coming soon, sometime this fall here, we're going to be doing over on the Nerd Party Network a little show called House of Fincher, where Tristan Riddell and John Mills and we go over all of David Fincher's films in chronological order. But next feature, the next trilogy that we're covering, Zach, it's got a name that I can't remember. It's like The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3 or something like that.
The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3.
It's got something to do with trains.
Yes, so this is the East Rail 177 trilogy. And you might ask yourself, what is that? And you'll have to find out next week on Franchise 15. No, we're going to tell you. And it's the Unbreakable, Split, and Glass trilogy. And yes, those 3 movies are connected. If this is a pre-Glass world, it would be a spoiler to tell you that Split was connected to Unbreakable, because that was an amazing twist. So, but hey, the cat is out of the bag, as they say. And we thought we'd do a really kind of unorthodox trilogy. It's a very unconventional trilogy, I guess. So as a new shade of trilogy to franchise to talk about here on Franchise Fatigue. So that's going to be our next franchise coming up.
Franchise Fatigue. You said
whatever.
fatigue.
It's ours, no ours.
One of the two.
Speaking of ours, my personal email, to throw it out there to all the fans out there, if you want to please don't flood my inbox, right? But my personal email is ZacharyRMoore@gmail.com. But if you look at it, the R kind of bleeds into the M. So it's very common for people to send me emails with leaving out the R, so I don't get them, right? And some guy in Arizona gets them. I know this because sometimes they respond to the people that send them the emails. And like when I was working in TV, when I first started providing an official email at the TV station I worked at, they sent it to my personal email. And apparently this guy in Arizona was like, this all looks very interesting, but this is not me. So anyway, R's are important. So let's remember when they are there and when they're not supposed to be there. So yes, our next franchise on Franchise Fatigue is going to be the East Rail 177 trilogy, directed by M. Night Shyamalan.
Awesome. Well, if R's are very important, I got a joke for you. What's a pirate's favorite letter?
R?
Actually, it's the C. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you so much to Ken Tripp and Tony Robinson for being the executive producers of our network, and thank you so much to Zach Tripp for creating our wonderful theme music. And if you want to support us on Patreon, please feel free to do so. Zach and I do a commentary for a Star Trek episode once a month. For this month, we released a commentary on the Vulcan Hello, and you can get early releases and whatnot over there. And I guess that's all we got for you now, because right now we are out of time.
This is heavy.
This has been a production of MTMR Media Works.